get started. So we have a few items on today's agenda. The first was a reference to an existing issue. I don't know, Spike, do you want to talk through this?
Sure. So we've had a chat about this issue at a couple of SIG Node meetings and haven't been able to get to a resolution to kind of get everybody up to speed from the beginning. What's going on is we're talking about the container lifecycle hooks. These are hooks that execute when containers start and stop. And currently, these hooks are being executed synchronously, or at least the post-start hooks are being executed synchronously in the context of a pod in kubelet. So you'll execute one container hook, wait till that finishes synchronously before you move on to the next container hook, etc. And also before sending any pod status updates for that pod. Now, crucially, that pod status update contains the pod IP, which Calico networking plugin, when it's running just in policy only mode, looks for that pod IP so that it understands how to set up network policy for the container. So because that pod IP is not being updated, is being blocked behind these synchronous post-start hooks, that means that the post-start hook itself is unable to use the network and is kind of blocked from using the network because Calico can't find out about the IP and can't set up network policy. So it's just blocking that container from doing any networking. So that's the issue, and my ask is for that pod status with the pod IP to not be blocked behind these hooks, either by making the hooks asynchronous or by sending the pod status update before starting into this synchronous calling of the hooks. Either of those solutions is sort of fine, but that's the ask.
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember what the action item was out of the previous discussion on this, if there was...
I mean, I think we just ran out of time on the discussion. There was some fretting about whether or not we're sending, like adding another pod status update to the startup sequence of a pod is going to be a problem, and also about whether or not moving these things to be asynchronous is going to be a problem. So kind of neither solution was kind of accepted as being the right one.
Yeah, was there a third option though? I thought there potentially was a third option, which was a change outside of Kubernetes, but maybe I'm misreading.
Oh yeah, there was saying, well, why don't you just like learn the pod IP over the CNI, and that in this current deployment mode that we're talking about, Calico is not the CNI plugin. Calico is just providing network policy, so we're not communicating across the CNI, and it adds a lot of complexity for us to have to like be a CNI plugin or talk to kubelet locally to find out this information and then broadcast it into the rest of the cluster, because it's not just the node that is hosting the pod that needs the pod IP. The rest of the cluster needs to know it as well.
I remember they also have another one proposal during the conversation, and people suggest maybe you can query CLI about the pod IP, because the CLI already done for the sandbox creation, so they already have those things.
Query the what?
Query CLI. So we could have like update CLI and give you those information.
As in the container runtime?
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess. Yeah, one option would be that Calico is a CNI plugin as well, even though it's not actually kind of wiring the networking interfaces up, or have some other query interface that it uses to talk to kubelet or something. But I would really prefer not go down those routes, because then that adds a new layer of complexity to Calico. You know, we're not learning this information via any of those routes today. We're not a CNI plugin, and if it wasn't for this, you know, this lifecycle hook thing, we wouldn't have to do that, right? We learn the pod IP from the API server, you know, in normal circumstances.
Do you know if anybody else is having a similar problem? I guess we've never quite made any guarantees on the state of the pod as manifest in the API server when hooks are executed. And I'm curious if you're aware of any other users that have hit this problem, because basically, if we do proceed on this, we'd have to basically kind of provide some guarantee on what it means, what the state of, or what is accessible from an API server in the context of execution of a hook. And then I'm curious if there'd be anything desired on a pre-stop hook about the state of that pod. Obviously, you have certain expectations on post-start, but I'm curious if there'd be counter expectations on pre-stop.
I am not aware of any.
So,
just to clarify, this is a problem when code in the post-start hook needs network access, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the post-start hook itself is you know, in general, in the general case, not talking to the API server. The post-start hook itself doesn't necessarily care what state the API server is in. It just wants to talk on the network, you know, sort of at all. And right now, it can't, because Calico doesn't know what the pod's IP address is, and so can't sort of safely let it out into the network.
and if I recall, you wanted post-start hooks to not be invoked until the API server was informed of its present pod state.
Can you repeat that?
You wanted a post-start hook to never be invoked if the kubelet hadn't communicated back to the API server about the status of that pod.
No, I just want the pod IP, like the pod status update with the pod IP, to not be blocked, right? I don't have any requirements about it actually being sent before, just as long as it eventually gets sent, right?
That is just deadlock. So the post start hook, so they're waiting for the pod IP to finish it. But the current our implementation, it is we don't update after the post start. We have like enough the status service, it is created and running. We won't update the pod status. So in your proposal, it is just send the actual pod status after we've created off the sandbox. So we already have the pod IP. The concern, it is the scalability concern. That's the only concern I can think about, because that's the most simplified approach to give them this one, and also most clean way, but it's the scalability, that's the concern. So to change off the post start, make the post start hook is asynchronous, and then there's the other bigger concern, because obviously this use cases, because right now it's the blocking, right? So we worry about like the container status is we couldn't, there's the many issues I forgot on top of my head that time when we talk about. So that's kind of the current story. It's just deadlock right now.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things we talk about, I think that you just already mentioned that it's because it's not a CNI, so cannot get the information. And another thing is we mentioned that we can query running current state, because, and if I remember correctly, because Calico is not, you may try to query the pod IP, which is maybe on the remote node. It's not necessarily on the local node. And for resource consumption. So you may end up have the one agent to run on the one node, but need to query multiple pod on different node is the pod IP. If I remember correctly, because we asked those questions. So
yeah, so the pod IP needs to be known across the entire cluster in order to set up the policy correctly. If you imagine, you know, a pod coming up and it's in its post-start hook, but it needs to talk to another pod, and there's a policy that says, you know, allow this connection from this label, right? That remote node needs to understand that there's this IP that's associated with this label, so it can allow the connection. So, you know, if we had to query locally, we would still then need to kind of get that information across the cluster by writing it into the data store. I mean, we use the data store as the way that we synchronize the nodes across the cluster.
Mm.
Just looking at the code in SyncPod, I mean, it seems like there's a window between when the sandbox is created and when we try to start the first container in the sandbox that the update can be done.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's why I think about the create of the sandbox, give the pod status update is most simple way, straightforward. But there also have the couple concerns. One is the scalability concern. Another concern it is we may end up also have the problem because until you finish run all the container once, right? So you could be in Kubernetes, so you could be like the restart entire of the pod, include of you may end up, there's the couple error cases we may, oh my God, we may restart the fault container. So then basically you may end up have the new pod IP. So once if I start all the container in that user application container, everything's once, if that fail, so Kubernetes responsibility based on the restart policy will restart, most likely will restart the container. And there's a pod IP is not changing. But
are you referring to if we shut down the whole sandbox?
yes,
Yeah.
sorry? Yeah. So you basically share the same sandbox and you won't change the pod IP. But when you first create of the pod IP, it's not guaranteed that pod IP will stay with that one. You may end up, we try to start the container in the middle and the fail certain operation and we restart. So this is the second concern, but the majority concern, bigger is the concern for the, so what I have the scalability.
I mean, would it be a problem to send another status update if you end up kind of tearing down and recreating the sandbox with a different IP?
We can. What I just want to board up to you is not like that you got that the pod IP and then I will stay there because you earlier mentioned that you are going to cache and store that in your data store. So I just want to board up to you because.
Oh no, I mean we're watching the data store, so we will notice
Okay.
if it changes and handle that. I mean we already have to, right? If the pod IPs can change.
Okay. So then the biggest concern is just scalability. And I guess that's the people's concern. I think the people, we should, someone have to do the measurement.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to see what updates we already do and when. And it could be possible that we can just move an update that we're already doing to after this point. I don't know. I have to look, but that could be an idea where we're not adding a net one. We're just delaying one for a little while.
That's quite dangerous. Right now, we basically doing like after you try one more round, no matter it's a fail or succeed, you update, right? So I'm not sure how we are going to delay one, because right now it's basically what the proposal spec propose is just add the actual one. And when we create a sandbox and send the ones. And so normally I personally think it's relatively safe, but the only thing is concerned is the scalability. So someone have to try. Spec, do you want to try for this one and say this is scalability? What's the actual?
Well, I mean, what is it specifically that you would want to know? Just like some raw numbers about how many updates get sent in the two different cases? Or like, are you talking about like running a Kubernetes scale test?
I think the scalability, SIG scalability, they use the capture a number, and then they have like ideal word. So I don't know, they have some metrics. So can we run some tests? But that one we need to talk to the scalability team. I haven't followed that for a while. They have some like the special test. You don't need to really spin up that many of node. And there's the simulation. So then they have the estimate threshold. So maybe we need to run those things. So this ones will affect everybody, no matter they run the canonical or not run the canonical, right? So
I'm just trying to think through, like, net, I'd be worried about the latency, if any, in pod creation time, concurrent pod creation, basically any use cases that might be folks building like functions platforms on top of kublets, to see if this makes it any better or worse. And then probably like, I don't know how many nodes you really need to simulate. I think that's where coming out to the scalability SIG would be useful. Like if you're spinning up 2,000 functions across 10 nodes or something, is there a material impact here? Like, because this basically will eat up kubelet QPS to the API server, and I'm kind of curious about just how much. We could
I
probably do
mean,
some math.
do you
figure that
have
out.
QPS budgets now?
we do.
Yeah, we do. There are people that are like, so Seth, who was looking at this, he's an example of somebody who went through and like did a lot of work to try to bring down pod startup latency because people are building like functions platforms on top of Kube. And so any of these additional calls just like makes it a little slower for that function to get run.
Yeah.
And so we could probably do back of the envelope math calculation to know like the default kubelet QPS back to the API server is X. The anticipated concurrent number of pods that can start will go to Y with this change. So we could probably just
Well,
measure
I
that
mean,
pretty quickly.
I want to emphasize that like we don't have to do this status update synchronously. Like it's not like I'm saying, you know, you create the sandbox, you do a pod status update. Once that pod status update is completed, then you start creating the containers, right? So like I can see how that can add significant latency if you have to like go and do an update to the API server, and that is not a requirement. I just am saying that the pod status update should not be blocked behind these hooks. So you know you start the sandbox, you then return the pod IP that goes onto some queue somewhere that eventually turns into a pod status update, right? That's all fine. Like it doesn't have to be a synchronous thing. I mean, I'm assuming that pod status updates are queued anyway right now, right? These things aren't done synchronously. If we're worried about how quickly you can get a pod running.
I I think the problem it is, so we try to update the pod statuses based on the significant changes about the pod status. So we will pod it is the small scheduling unit, and for the API server or for the control plane. So for them to manage. So we basically it is the reason we wait for the post start hook finishes because that's indicate it is this uh, uh, clearly indicator of the container real status. So I understand what you propose. You earlier proposed to make the asynchronous before this finish. The problem it is we may send a certain status back, say, oh, this is miss send represent this container is running, but actually the post start hook maybe think about this is not running. So that's
Yeah, but I mean the post start hook is run asynchronously relative to the container. So what kubelet does now is start the container,
yes,
and then start the post start hook, and it waits for the post start hook to complete. But that during that entire time, right? If the post start hook, hangs and takes 5 minutes to run, the container is already running, and it's been running for 5 minutes.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to work through like when we force an update right now in the set pod status code block, and we only do it right now if we set a deletion timestamp. Otherwise, we have a number of heuristics here on trying to figure out when to send it. It's possible another way we could look at that is, I mean, to your point, it just goes into a queue. Like we do take a lock every time we call this thing. And so I just need to step through this to see the real cost. And given the complexity of status manager, it's probably not our best use of time to do that while everyone's on this call versus like just doing a quick measurement or walkthrough of present status manager call. At least that'd be my preference, but I'm trying to do that in the background here to get an answer. Unless Seth, your memory is better than mine and you have this to memory or somebody else on the call did.
Yeah, I do not.
Because otherwise, like, per your point, everything goes into a queuing channel, and then there's code logic in here that's just like trying to ensure we don't change how pod phases progress, and so it's like a tricky code block that I just need to take some time to read through.
Okay.
Is it something that you either, I guess myself, I'll finish reading through this, or if you had time, you could want to read through existing status manager.go, you could see how the call would get queued, and just we could come on PR and handle it that way, or the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely look. I'm certainly pretty novice in terms of how kubelet's code is constructed.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay. Well, I'll try to finish reading through this to get a sense.
do we want to wait for this one or we move to next topic?
No, I think we can move to the next topic because it's going to require one of us to sit through the status manager code block.
Okay, so next one, I think that is just to ask for the huge page PR review and approval. I think that review one, simple one, and Derek, I also looked through that node allocatable C group upon the status update. I think it looks good, but I want you take a last look because you are the one implement of the huge page. So to make sure.
Yeah, I had that one open. And there are also some comments in SIG Node Slack around getting clarification from SIG release if this needed, like the container bounding of huge pages needed to go through an enhancement issue or a KEP or not. And I had not thought it did, but I guess we'll try to get clarity on that. But enforcement at node allocatable, I don't think is an issue that warrants, but I'll take a look at the few.
I think that at least we can address that node allocatable because it looks like a bug. No matter it is support multiple size or single size, we could address that problem.
Yeah, I'll have to look at the, we never let you really reserve huge pages, if I recall. And so I think that's why we never had it, had to be enforced at the node allocatable level, because it was assumed that the kubelet had full access to huge pages. And so, yeah, I can take a quick look.
So, Vinay, do you want to quickly update about the in-place vertical scaling?
Yeah, hi. So I've been working on addressing the initial review comments that Tim left for me. And I'm working on the last item, which is using the moving some of the checks for feature gate away from validation and into the drop fields in the core, in the registry portion of the code. And that seems to be working. The only part that I could not move out is the update part, and that is because there is, even though we're going to make resources mutable in this case, that information could be, it's not available at the time of the drop code. Is called both in create and update. In one of the cases, it is available. In the other case, it's not applicable. So some of them I have to leave over there. The other thing that I was working on was to update. Jordan had some comments about whether defaults, setting it in defaults, we want to be able to support a older version of kubectl, for example. And those versions of kubectl would drop these fields because they don't know about it. So I could not use the set defaults in this case for the policy or the resources allocated, and this has to be done from the plugin, and that seems to be working. So it's in progress, and I think I'll have an updated review out by tomorrow, maybe. So hopefully I'm going to complete the API portion of it this week. We did lose one resource because of the travel ban. I think two of my colleagues have gone to China for the New Year's, Lunar New Year, and they're stuck over there. So I'm running a little short. I'm still trying to do this for 118, but just wanted you to know that I'm running a little short on resources here. That's all I had.
Thanks for updates.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions regarding this? I think we can pick it up after I publish my updated code. Mainly have to convince Jordan and Tim that this is good and get their buy-off, and then I can move to the next stage, which is changing the kubelet.
Cool. Thanks. Let's move to the SIG rule version 2 updates.
Hey, Don. Hey, Giuseppe, are you on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So also here I would like to get a review on the cap that it's open, so that I can keep opening some pull requests on the C group V2 support. I added a link in the agenda to a demo where I show that with a code that's already in opening a pull request, it's possible to spin a pod on a C group V2 system. I think that I took care of all the comments. There is just one thing that I think we should discuss here, and it's about the C group NS, whether we want to enable it by default or not.
So I think for C group NS, we can probably disable it for privileged containers, but it could be enabled for the non-privileged cases.
Yeah, my doubt is that it will be a breaking change, because containers will behave differently on a C group V1 or a C group V2. So like if we enable by default, at the moment we have no way to disable it. So we would also need to like to expose the option to disable it. And,
Giuseppe, does it affect the introspection by any chance? The support that containers have where they can read their own values?
they can read their own values, and I think in general it's safe to enable it because it's a safety measure. Like a container won't have visibility on the rest of the C groups. But I'm not sure if enabling by default how it will affect like existing environments. So, yeah, this is the only point that still it's, for me it's unclear.
I guess you can try it out and see what breaks. Maybe run an E2E with that enabled in Cryo CI.
So I guess I don't know if Don is usual with you, but the cap I was generally okay with for proceeding. The only question I had was the secret namespace stuff. It was like folks will still want to be able to run cAdvisor inside the container and monitor the host. And so if Mrinal, you were saying the suggestion was a privileged container wouldn't use cgroup-ns, like that, if that works, that sounds good to me. I don't know how others felt, but I wanted to make sure that people can still do that.
Yeah.
As for like, so I don't know, Dawn, do you know if anyone from your side has had a chance to review the cap?
I don't know other people. I think everyone don't have time, but when the first cap sent out, I did quickly read through. We definitely require of the privilege support. So almost every single node have some certain level of the privilege. So, but I think about we should pursue because we cannot just, I think that anyway, for the first, for initial, we always have to do the existing. I will have to do the coexist, right? So to support both single and V2. So I like to see that to pursue, move forward. And people can do the testing, people can see more in the real work node to run and do the AD comparison.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess we have some time. I don't know if everyone had a chance to review the cap. I don't know if Giuseppe, for those who hadn't, if you wanted to just summarize what the cap is offering. But otherwise, before that, just like thinking practical ways to proceed, like obviously we're past the feature-free state for this release of Q, but I think if we can get consensus on the cap so that we can proceed with merging PRs in 119, I think that's like the desired outcome. And so just Giuseppe, I want to make sure that you understood that like your PRs probably won't be able to land until 119 opens.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so the cap reduced its scope like from the initial discussion we had because like from the discussions we had on GitHub, we decided like to reach parity first and not so that the cap concentrated just to reach parity with what we have now, and then later analyze the C group with only features that can be added. So well, as it is now, I think it will be quite easy to get it done for 119 if we agree on that. Yeah, because initially there was the also describing adding the new features that are only available on C group v2, but I guess each of them requires a separate discussion.
I agree with you. So each one of them need a separate discussing, and each one we have to kind of open how we plan to do the resource management based on the figure out, understand the difference between V1 and the SIG V2. So that's why I want to move forward. And during that time, we add more tests. We can do the AP comparison based on today's policy, today's rule, today's the quality of the services, enforcement on the node. Then we can understand we may need do some like resource management version 2 based on the SIG version 2.
Yeah, I guess to unblock this discussion, maybe Don, what I would propose is I'd like to be able to merge the KEP as is now, but update the status to implementable with the proposal to be that it goes in alpha in 119.
Yes.
And so that just have to make sure that you're unblocked in the next release, and then we can get the paperwork in place with SIG release that there's no challenges there. But I think everything that you had there was good from a parity standpoint. And the only issue on, if you're fine on having Kubernetes not be used on privileged pods, then I had no other issue with this KEP. So
yeah. Still, I think there we should have a way to disable the cgroup-ns, because if a pod requires just visibility on the cgroups, I don't think we should require it to be privileged. Like,
okay.
But yeah, also another thing that's still missing, and it's the UGTLB support, because on cgroup v2 still it's not in a released kernel.
So, Giuseppe, is that going to be 5.6 or?
Yeah,
okay.
it's Linux Next right now.
Okay.
So it's the next release.
So I think we are also pursuing like adding end-to-end suites first to Cryo, and then we'll work on it upstream. And meanwhile, Fedora should have the kernel with those changes, so we can use Fedora to test that support.
Yeah.
Do you want to instead the end-to-end test? Do you want to start from the node E2E? Because node E2E actually have the more resource management related test.
Okay.
I know recently we because after we have resource management, a lot of resource management done, so we didn't really add more node E2E. Some tests should be up to date, because sometimes it's not part of the pre-submit test, but I think a lot of tests can be reused to do this A/B comparison. I thought it's easy for us to do that. Just start from the single node.
Okay.
Yeah, and some of those tests actually read what's mounted in SysFS group, so I think they won't fail. And so we're going to need to update that as part of that work. But yeah, okay.
More focus on the node.
Okay. Yeah.
And more focused, and then also could test out the overcommitted scenario, scenario. That's what we care, right? So we want to look at this new memory management or new CPU management, all those kind of things. What's the difference? So there's some of the stress tests on the node, on the resources. So yeah, I just suggest node E2E. That will be easier.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's a good point, and we'll also take a look at the tests themselves to make sure, yeah, we're not missing something.
Thanks.
All right, so then my takeaway here from Don is I'm going to approve this KEP and assume that both you and I are on the same page, and Yuju can follow up on the 119 timeframe, and then we'll just unblock you for 119, and I apologize, this is too late in 118.
Derek, do you mind? I just update that one, like the update what I just mentioned here in the meeting, because I think that we capture those things there.
For the Node EDE test.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I will update that right after this meeting. Looks like this is the good start point. We can revisit our resource management. I think we have a lot of regrets before. Maybe start from here. Any other I think that's all for today, right? So any other topic people want to board up? Yeah, I think that's it. Then thank you for everyone attending today's meeting. See you next week.